Thank you all so much for joining us today. And for those of you who joined us for the write-in last week, thank you. I hope it was a moment of gentleness and healing for you all at this time. On behalf of Primary Stages and the ESPA family, I welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn Playwriting Prompt. For those of you who are new to us, Primary Stages is an off-Broadway theater company in New York City. And ESPA, the Einhorn School of Performing Arts, is the school that is a part of Primary Stages for emerging and established artists. My name is Kelly Letourneau. I am an ESPA team and family member. I'm the ESPA Student Services Associate. You received an email from me today confirming this session, and you'll receive an email following up from me. If you have any questions about ESPA, Primary Stages, please send me an email. It's kelly@primarystages.org. We are so excited today to have Maria Mileaf, who is a ESPA instructor and director with us. Hi, Maria.
Hey, guys.
Maria has directed for Primary Stages. She directed Sharon Washington's Feeding the Dragon. I think we're hearing Mochi. Hi, Mochi. You're good. You're good. That's Maria's dog. We love dogs. So she's directed Feeding the Dragon, starring and written by Sharon Washington, Lee Blessing's Body of Water, and his Going to St. Ives, which won the 2005 Outer Critics Circle Award for Best New Play. In New York City, she has directed Vijay Tendulkar's Sakaram Binder, yes, and Maria Milosavljevic, Abyss, for the Play Company, Alan Zweibel's Playing God for Throughline at 59 East 59, and Alexandra Gerstwin Basilaros, The Argument at the Vineyard. She also directed Lobster Alice at Playwrights Horizons, and favorite regional credits include Patricia Whiting's F2M and Joanna Murray Smith's 90 at New York Stage and Film, Nash's The Rainmaker at the Old Globe, Lisa D'Amour's Detroit, and Lynn Nottage's Ruined at the Philadelphia Theater Company, where Maria won a Barrymore Award for Outstanding Direction of Tracy Scott Wilson's The Story. Lucy Preble's Sugar Syndrome, John Belusco's A Nervous Smile, and Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit at Williamstown Theater Festival are also favorites. And the list goes on and on. Maria has directed on the West End. She directed Richard Schiff in Glenn Berger's Underneath the Lintel. So it is vast, it is wonderful, and Maria is a wonderful teacher, and we're so lucky to have her as part of the ESPA family. Thank you for being with us today, Maria. Usually in these Lunch and Learns, the place I like to start is talking about an artist's journey to their profession and their craft. So my question for you is, what was your journey to becoming director? Was it something you always wanted to do, or was it something that grew and a passion that grew from other endeavors?
So the real story is that when I was in college, I was studying critical theory, and I was kind of nerdy, and I really wanted to get out of writing a paper, so I offered to direct a play as a way to get out of writing a paper. And I didn't really know that much about it. I mean, I had been in like West Side Story in high school, but I kind of loved the collision of written ideas and visual ideas and movement ideas and political ideas, and having to collaborate to make something, and the communion with both the company and the audience. And so that was my junior year in college. And then I was lucky. I went to Italy. I was invited to go observe Dario Fo, who is a commedia political clown. So he invited me to go just watch their company. He was teaching when I was in college, and I speak Italian because I'm Italian. And so I met him that way. And they kind of said it as like an offhand thing, like, oh, you should come. But I did. They were surprised when I showed up. And then I went to graduate school, which is where I actually got to, think about making work. And that's how I kind of started doing it. So it wasn't a childhood dream, and I didn't, like many people, I didn't even know that it existed like as a thing. You think actors. So I've been really lucky to make a career out of it, because I really I still find that process really compelling.
I think the communion of it is really beautiful. My follow-up question to this is, what play did you direct to get out of the paper?
It's so pretentious. I directed Endgame, like in a bathroom. Yeah, thank you. So I thought it was really political. Yeah.
I've always thought Shakespeare would be funny set in bathroom settings.
Yeah. But something I just want to say is that I'm actually married now to the set designer who did that production, which the other person who didn't want to write a paper, who was playing Ham, said, "Oh, I know this guy. He'll do the set." And I didn't date him for 15 years, you know, but that's how I met him, which is sort of interesting. So theater has been really meaningful to me in a lot of ways. But yeah.
Who knew Endgame would be the catalyst for the long game?
That was the play, yeah. Which I still love that play. Yeah.
Well, since you've brought up your husband and we've seen your daughter and your dog,
yeah.
As someone who's had to balance a career and a family, how do you and your husband Neil balance work and home when you're both working on shows? How does that look like for you?
So I'm married to Neil Patel, who's a production designer and a set designer. And we did Going to St. Ives and oh my God, Kelly, I don't even remember the other Lee Blessing play that I directed at Primary Stages. But we did them both together at Primary Stages, and he is now primarily working as a production designer for television and film. So he did Dickinson for Apple last season. I don't know if anybody saw that show, but he's a really good set designer. And I think that, excuse me, it's an interesting question. The great thing about having a partner who does what you do is that they actually understand what you do. And so things like scheduling or obsession or collaborators, like we really understand what that is. But I would say that we had an advantage to other people that I see that have dual theater careers, which is that we worked together for 10 years before we started dating, so that our professional relationship preceded our personal relationship. And I think that after we were married, we had to remember to have meetings in an office or a studio or something, and not constantly be talking about work, and also vice versa, speaking on purpose with other collaborators, so that there wasn't this kind of married shorthand where you're like, what, you can't read my mind? Don't you remember when we saw that painting together? So the reality of it is that I can barely afford to work with him now. His career is a bigger career than, or he books as a designer much more in advance than I do. And so it's a little bit of a treat when we get to work together now. I'm trying to think what the last thing that we did together was, but he didn't do Feeding the Dragon with me at Primary Stages because that show started in another city where I worked with the resident designer of that theater. But anyway, I kind of love working with him. He's reading, trying to remember what book so we're in Cape Cod right now, and he's reading Thoreau, some Thoreau book that was on the bookshelf. And I don't know how you guys, what it is that's your source material when you start writing. For me, a lot of, I used to have this big collection of visual things that I didn't know what to do with, but he's reading this Thoreau book. And I guess in the 18th century, or the 19th century, sorry, I just want to get, in the 19th century, there were so many shipwrecks in Cape Cod that they built these little houses on stilts and left them on the ocean. And so then when there would be shipwrecks and people washed to shore, it was so common that they would leave these little houses on stilts and people would climb into them, and the locals would leave crackers and firewood there so that they could climb out of the water. It's hard to imagine. They look like confessionals on stilts, basically, to me. And there's like a picture that Thoreau had drawn in this book. And Neil, he was just like reading outside, and he's like, oh my God, look at this. Like, what play can we put this in? And that kind of dreaming, like when you're living with the person, I find to be really kind of luxurious. That, like, I don't know what play to put that in, but I want to find it, like the people crawling out of the water with like these little weird houses kind of, under the ocean. It was kind of cool. So that's kind of what I love about it, or having a common experience that you can like draw on, or like really know somebody. Like I can say to him, oh, I think that scene needs to be more winter, and he'll know what I mean, whether it's emotional or visual or psychological. And that's like a kind of luxury to have. And then it's also kind of, I think, difficult and important to have a open communication system, not just with who you're married to, but like your close collaborators, where you can, criticize each other, push each other to be more thoughtful, to make more difficult work, to like really self-edit in a stronger way. I think maybe so I'm Sicilian, so I'll never get divorced, so he can say whatever he wants, and like I have to take it. But it's good to have somebody to like really say like, oh, that's not working. And I think it's hard to be at that place with collaborators. I don't think that's unique to being married to somebody. I think it's important to find that with all of your collaborators, but it's especially good if you have like a healthy working relationship and somebody can take risks to say stuff like that. That's been really important, and both ways, I think.
Do you, with collaborators outside of your marriage, is there a feedback framework you start with? Do you have any tips for like building those relationships where you can criticize and provide feedback? Or is that just time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one thing I would say is that I think it's really important to show up. So I think like you have to go see your peers work, so that not just the work that you make with them, but their other work, like to understand what their body of work is and what their world is, so that you have some kind of context to provide, critical thought and feedback. And so that would be like the biggest thing, is so that you like kind of know what they're doing. But when I work with people that I don't know, or also students, or I tend to borrow from Liz Lerman's critical response. Are you guys familiar with that? So
it has been brought up in Lunch and Learn. This will be the third time.
Yeah,
so I think 3 is a magical number.
Yeah,
so
well, she's pretty influential, and I think a lot of people, and also weirdly during the pandemic, she was doing free classes online. You can find it. If you look up her company on her website, which I don't have right now, like I did that. Like she just had, not like this where you could see each other, but like she was doing some webisodes that you could just show up for. Because I had known about her methodology, but I had never met her, so it was interesting for me to see her talk about it. But it's basically a feedback system for visual work, for dance work, and it works really well. But the main thing is that you say what you see, and sometimes just hearing that can help somebody. Like I'm looking at somebody with red hair on an ocean, and the theater maker thinks that they have somebody with like pink curls in the desert. That's like a big difference. So if you just say what you see, and also I think it's really helpful to try and help a collaborator, a theater maker articulate what they're making rather than what you wish they should do with the thing that they're doing. Like that's to sit back and listen to what the theater maker is making, which, I bet you all, like as theater makers, it's easy to see when it doesn't work, like when critics are like, why wasn't the play this thing? That has nothing to do with what you were making. It's just what they thought they wanted to see. So I think as a feedback giver, editor, or collaborator, it's really important to keep that in mind, like what the, or, you know, and it works, you know, with actors, like if you're, you know, to be open to what they're creating rather than like, I have the thing finished in my head, and if you guess it, I say good work. You know, that's the worst version of it. But so anyway, that's her methodology, her formal methodology, I find really helpful if you have nowhere to start from.
Well, yes, thank you. And hearing that she was offering classes, I will send everybody a link to her website following this class. So I will look that up for us all.
I have it somewhere, Kelly, too. I can get that for you. Yeah.
Great. Let me just make a note. So I'd love to talk about Feeding the Dragon, which was a production at Primary Stages, written by and starring Sharon Washington. From the director's perspective, how do you approach a work differently when it's a solo piece as opposed to like a larger cast or an ensemble piece?
That's a good and difficult question. So I've done 2 kinds of solo shows, or I would say even 3 kinds of solo shows. One, I've done a lot of performance art, which is, I think, really different from like Sharon's work, which was text-based work. And I've done solo work like Underneath the Lintel, which was written by a playwright and performed by an actor who was not the same person. But in the case of Feeding the Dragon, Sharon wrote the play to be performed by herself.
And it was autobiographical, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And she will say that, yes. And so that's like a very personal and intimate exchange when you're working with someone who's making work. And I was lucky because I worked with Sharon on that piece, not from the very beginning, but from the first public performance of it. So she had readings and workshops of it, and then I came on to direct the first production of it. So it was inchoate when I started, and then it, you know, became what it was. So I was involved in the development of it, but not from the beginning. So it's a very, the one thing I would say is that I think it's different for every person that you work with, because every person has different goals and dreams and capabilities. And this was Sharon, I don't know if you guys know her work, but she's like an amazing actress and also a very experienced actress with like a huge, you know, a solid career, but it was her first play. So even for herself, she was in a different place in terms of experience and organization. And so what's different about it is that you're when you can't talk to the writer about the actor, or you can't like talk to the actor about illustrating things in the writing that would help, you know, expose something or suggest changes, because it's the same person. And the other thing is when somebody, beyond just the emotional risk that people take as writers, then it's also her body and voice and face on stage, embodying that journey. And so I thought that's like an incredibly vulnerable and brave place to be. So I think that the kinds of conversations that you can have, for me, were very much about facilitating her journey as both a writer and an actor. And it didn't feel to me like there was so much ego or agenda, like as a director. Like more than anything else, I was never sitting there thinking like, what are the cool visual ideas that can really, you know, help support this journey? Like that actually never came up. It was really all about her journey as a writer and actress. And I would also say, and you know, this was a gift, but because Sharon is such a, you know, deeply knowledgeable and effective and compelling actor, the exchange of ideas was on like that level. So she had her own ideas about, of course, like how she wanted the play to be or what it could be, or she was very clear about what she was looking for in terms of support and prodding and critical feedback. So it was like a pretty open discussion. So that's a pretty long answer to a very lovely question. The other thing about doing solo shows is that you can't work for the full day because people just get burnt out. So in a weird way, the dreaming in between rehearsals takes on like a different kind of energy than a regular rehearsal period for me, like in a good way. Because you can, you can have like a challenge that you can't meet in rehearsal, and normally you still have like 4 hours of rehearsal left, but in the case of a solo show, you're like, oh, rehearsal's over, and then you can like really kind of dig in and think about new approaches like in between, and like I like that time.
I had never considered the logistical aspect of when it is one actor, rehearsals do have to be shorter.
Yeah.
And Sharon is a beloved family member of Primary Stages, so I just love hearing about this process. So when in rehearsal with Sharon, was there ever like a moment where you would be like, I'm talking to you as a playwright, or I'm talking to you as the actor, or was it all just one conversation, I guess? Like, was there ever a moment where you were like, okay, and now you're wearing your playwright hat? Because I know sometimes actor playwrights do that. They'll be like, I'm talking to you as the playwright now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and she could do the same thing. Like, yeah. She would just be like, I actually just need to like go home and write this and not think about how it's going to be performed. Or I could say like, let's just pretend we're like on a game show and the actor has to like solve this problem now without adjusting the writing. Like, we're going to stop. We always did that. I mean, I think it was an artificial boundary, but mostly for like expedience sake, you know. I do that with myself also, like when it's not a solo show and you're just like, what if you had to stage this scene? Like I did a production of Peer Gynt this year, which I don't know if you guys know that play, but it's like an insane play and like a forest that sings. And it was the one scene where I was just like, I don't know what a singing forest is. And then I had this, there were 18 people in the play, and I went into rehearsal and I was just like, at the end of this rehearsal, this forest is going to be singing. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to, and I did. And I would say 80% of what we discovered that day ended up in the production. Like, there's something good about like having, you know, boundaries and goals and just like going for it. Sometimes it unlocks something that you can't get through in the privacy of your own mind.
Sometimes there's freedom and discovery to be found within structure.
Yeah.
Kelsey just sent me a question. Do you have recommendations for authors, playwrights, when they're writing stage directions? Like, as a director, how do you encounter stage directions? What's your relationship? Like, if there's, you know, the text is here and there's stage direction and dialogue, like, what's your relationship to the stage directions?
Right. So you guys know that in a lot of plays, the stage directions are written by the stage manager after the play is produced, right? So the playwright will come with the manuscript into rehearsal, and then something will happen. And then when they go to publish the script after production, the stage manager like writes those. So that's, in a lot of older plays, I kind of give myself permission not to read them, because there's no way to know where they came from. But of course, contemporary playwrights like you guys, like, I think people are much more thoughtful and purposeful, not only about the stage directions, but about how text is shared on the page in terms of like rhythm and poetry and importance. And so they become, and not only stage directions, but like vocal interpretation. Like, playwrights will have their own methodology for like what a dash means, what a slash means, how interruption, like how double speaking, like all that kind of stuff. And I try to be kind of respectful of it. You know, if you're working on a brand new play, you're going to be in the room with the playwright. So if the stage direction says this scene takes place on a bed floating in a lake, then you can talk to the playwright about like what that vision meant to them. Like, is it, you know, literally that? Is it figuratively that? Like anything. And then of course, once you decide that it is a mattress like floating in a lake, since you can't literally put a lake on stage, then you get to start talking about like visually, how is that presented to an audience and in what kind of space. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I feel like with new plays, stage directions are really important because playwrights give you little gifts in there about what their dreams are for the production. And I'm usually pretty respectful of what they are.
Totally.
So if I ignore them on purpose. It's not just like out of laziness or something.
Right.
Like if there's something where I'm like, wait, I think I have a different idea. And then of course, again, if it's a contemporary play, you can talk, you're collaborating with playwright.
No, it totally answers the question.
Yeah.
Alyssa, or Elisa, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, wrote in, and they are very interested in knowing what a singing forest actually looks like. And they want to hear more about that process and what came out of that.
The production of Peer Gynt that I did was at the Juilliard School. So I was working with students, and they were amazing, and they were really, really bold and game to do anything. So I felt like that scene we really created together. And as I just confessed, I didn't have like a big idea when I walked into it, but I can tell you that I told them the same thing. Like I didn't start pretending I had an idea. I said like, I don't have an idea, but what I did have was music. And I didn't cast the play and I didn't choose the play. It was the school did that. And there were a lot of really talented movers in that class of people. So what I created was a geographic set of rules about how a forest could move in space. And then I put on music. And then I fed in an improvisation different plot points into the movement improvisation, like the forest eats the character, and they weren't allowed to touch each other, so there wasn't, it wasn't like a free-for-all, but so what does it look like if you eat the person? Or the wind moves through the forest from stage left to stage right, or a flying pig lands in the middle of the forest and the trees are surprised, or add noise or whatever. Like that's sort of how I approached it. And at the end of the day, and because I did not, as I said, I did not go in with like a choreographer's plan of how to block it, although I have worked that way on different plays. But I have to say, like at the end of the day, the scene was beautiful. Like the forest basically kept a kind of narrow line, like a child would draw a forest, like every tree was like by itself, but you could literally see like the wind moving through it. Or when Peer Gynt came in and they had to stop him, the motion was very like, it really felt like trees bending in the wind. It was like beautiful, and they made it, but I provided the armature for the creation of the scene, I think, and responded to what they had, and they responded to each other. And that's how we made that scene.
It just makes me want to be in a rehearsal room.
Yeah, they were good. It was fun. I hadn't directed a play with 18 people in a really long time. So there's something great about having that kind of, you guys know as writers now, it's so hard to get something like that produced. Like you're almost like saying, please don't produce my play if you put 18 people in it. So it was really fun to be in a room with that many people available to make something.
Amazing. So one last question before I think we will dive into the prompt we have planned today. When you are encountering a new play, when I say new play, I mean a new play to you. What are some of your first guiding questions if you're like preparing to direct this production?
So two things. One, when I read a play for the first time, I try to actually like write down like what my reaction to it was, because I feel like the more you work on something, you forget. And when an audience sees a play, they only see it once. So I try to hold on to that, because then later I want to go back to those notes and remember like, oh, that was such a big moment when this conversation happened. And now I don't even notice that moment. So how do you hold on to your first impressions? That might be very similar to what an audience gets in their, because they have to experience it once chronologically and they can't go back in the most theater that I make. So that's one thing I try to really hold on to, that so that the deeper I delve, I don't forget what those impressions were. And then for me, I usually go to the moments that are the most difficult. And that can be a lot of things. And I try and solve that first. So like when I did, Detroit by Lisa D'Amour, a house blows up, it burns down on stage in scene. And, the script indicates there's like flame and stuff. And you're like, whoa, how are you going to do that? Like, what is that? Like, because what that looks like will very much influence the rest of the style of the piece, down to like the actors, or like who can perform on stage with fire. Like, what does that mean? So that was like, I like to go to the place that's the hardest thing. Sometimes the hardest thing is the casting. Sometimes the hardest thing is like a risk that you're asking the company to make with you in terms of content. And sometimes it's just like literally a thing that you can't solve, that has to do with, usually it's the elements, like it rains or it snows or people are in the water, or sorry, dropped my
There's
plug.
fire.
Yeah, but that's what I usually go to the hardest thing. And if I can figure the thing out that I don't understand, that will help me, understand how I want to visually present the piece.
Do you ever find that the hardest moment aligns with like the climax or like a turning point in the play?
I have to say, I really feel like it's really different from play to play, because sometimes it's just like you have children in the play and you're like, well, how do you solve that? Like, are they really children? Are they adults playing children? Are they, then that has nothing to do with the climax, but, or are they puppets? Like if you decide all the children characters in the play are going to be puppets, and that's what that like really dictates what kind of production you're making. Or so that so like with the house burning down, of course that was the climax, but that just happened to be one example of it. Or somebody eats their, suckles the decapitated head of their son. You're like, yeah, that's the Bacchae. But like you're like, how am I going to do that? Like, what is but sometimes it really is just, who am I going to cast as the love interest, because that's going to really physically tell the audience like what I think as a director, not even as a writer, like what that looks like in the world.
Right.
And that's a, political decision and a visual decision. So it's not always aligned with the writing in that way.
Well, thank you. I was just curious. That was totally.
You guys want to know what I did with the burning house down?
Yeah, we do.
So
Burn it down. How'd you burn
first
it
of
down?
all, we burnt the house. We got like real fire and things exploding, and we weren't in New York City, so it was easier. I didn't do the original production in New York. I did a production in Philadelphia. But this was the part that I really loved, which was the play takes place in a backyard. And so we planted like a picnic table with an umbrella in the backyard. It was there. So when the house started burning, the two characters who were drug addicts in the play picked up the umbrella and did like a slow pas de deux ballet to like this very kind of beautiful music with like the incredibly loud and increasingly growing sounds of the house burning, which eventually just became dark while they were dancing in spotlight, and then smoke took over the stage. And it was like very, very beautiful. And they were amazing and brave. And I'm really grateful to the Philadelphia Fire Department for letting us have gas exploding on stage. So that was fun. But it was a dream ballet because the characters were drug addicts. And so it gave us permission to do it in a slow motion in a different play. Anyway, that was one example.
That's so cool.
It was fun.
So cool. Well, shall we dive into the writing prompt you planned for us today?
Yeah. So I have always been really interested in the stories that we grow up with that shape the way we look at the world. And those are really different for everybody. And sometimes they're unexamined, and sometimes they're taken for granted, and sometimes they're very like purposeful. And so like for me, I was raised as an Italian Catholic, and I have always been like really interested in the lives of the saints. For other people, it could be fairy tales, it could be Bible stories, it could be parables, it could be Greek mythology, it could be folklore from wherever your grandparents came from. It could be a lot of things, but like there seems to be a pack of stories that we take for granted that are part of our lives. So I've always been really interested in those, and I'm interested in how they get recycled and reevaluated and shared from generation to generation, or from person to person, or from culture to culture. And so can we talk to each other, Kelly?
Yeah, I'll unmute people when they raise their hand.
So I was just wondering, like, if anybody can think of any other kinds of cultural, historical, familial, like stories that they carry with them that they'd want to share, like other examples of the ones I came up with looking for. So for example, like what I want to do with it is like, how many of you have just seen The Wizard of Oz? Anybody here seen The Wizard of Oz? So for example, I'm looking for a plot point that would be recognizable, like when Dorothy throws water at the witch and she melts. So many people would recognize that moment of, what is that moment? Like, what do you think that moment is? Is it bravery? Is it reclaiming one's identity? Is it clarity at what the secret key to the return? I don't know how you want to interpret it, but that moment means something. So my prompt to you would be to, one, identify an iconic plot point taken from some sort of shared cultural story. And then, so identify that, identify its beginning, middle, and an end, identify who the players are, like what are the iconic characters. So there's like, who's the protagonist, who's the witness, who is the antagonist in that scene. And then to write a contemporary scene with your own characters based on that iconic moment. That's the challenge.
That's the challenge. Folks have been messaging me some other examples of cultural stories, and I've gotten in the Passover Story, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet. So the task then would be to pick like one plot point within that, correct, Maria?
And I'm encouraging you to pick a plot point that would be recognizable. Like if you couldn't hear the text, or you couldn't, you know what I mean? Like when Romeo and Juliet meet at the party and their hands touch, I was thinking, yeah, exactly like that, yeah. You know, or, you know, a man encounters the ghost of his father on an empty field. Like certainly the tales of Shakespeare would be like a shared cultural education that a lot of theater artists have. So that would be it, like exactly. And yeah. I also think, you know, popular culture as Americans, like, you know, it's funny that Wizard of Oz would be our shared culture, or the moment in the Brady Bunch when she's like, Marcia, Marcia, Marcia. Like, there's lots of things that people
Bart
take
wrote
for
in,
granted.
Luke, I am your father.
There you go.
Right.
I'm also specifically challenging you guys to find something that, if it, you know, when you update it, when you transform it into characters who are more personal and interesting, or politically important, or timely to you, that your audience, it would resonate in your audience mind with their own iconic relationship to that moment. So it's a little bit more than the Umberto Eco, like walking into the forest as a young girl. It's more like opening the door and there's like a wolf in grandma's clothing. There's something like more specific to play with. Because I think if you find something for your prompt that's rather specific, in making yourself translate it to something contemporary, you'll have to answer more specific questions that will help provide you with details and things to play with. Where if it's just like a thematic thing, it won't provide enough structure to like go wild.
Would you recommend it be an action moment or like recognizable dialogue? Like, I'm thinking Little Red Riding Hood, Grandma, what big eyes you have.
Yeah.
Is it better to do the moment of discovery and like the wolf in Grandma's clothing, or the actual dialogue?
I think that's a great question, Kelly, and I think it could be any or either of those things. But I think that the identification of an iconic moment from a shared tale, and as many elements in it that you can identify, would be helpful. And then I snuck in the idea of having a beginning, middle, and an end, right?
Yes.
So I think that would answer whether you need to have dialogue or you don't need to have dialogue, or you need to, you know what I mean? Like, you could have some scene in a police precinct and then have an actual quote from a grim fairy tale, and that's the way you do it. Or it could just resonate because a character has a red hood and it never gets, I don't know how you solve it, or maybe none of those things are so obvious, but it's that moment of throwing the water on the witch, and whatever metaphorically melting means in 2020 to you. Like, it could be any of those things. Or which, can I share like quick? I know I have to go and let you guys write, but like one of this, a Life of a Saint that I'm like obsessed with, is a very little known saint. And so it's cheating because I'm asking you to find something recognizable, but you won't know this one. But does anybody know Santa Liberata? No. She was very, very holy girl who wanted to be a nun, and her father wanted to marry her off to like a rich match for his family. And so she prayed to God to make her undesirable to her suitor. And she spontaneously grew a full beard. And then her father had her crucified as a punishment. And so her iconic picture, which is in a lot of museums and things, you'll start seeing it now that I pointed it out to you, is a woman with a full beard in the crucifix, like on a cross, which is such a confusing and also like weirdly contemporary vision. Like, I want to turn that into a play. I'm not really sure how, but it's like a Life of a Saint that has like that moment of transformation. So it could really be anything, but I hope that you'll pick something that's interesting, and maybe something that you took for granted that you've been living with for a while. Like, why did the Little Mermaid like give up her voice in order to have genitals? Like, that's an interesting choice that someone has to make. And what does that mean in 2020, or certainly in the world today, like literally today in New York City, like, and across the country? There's so many questions that it would be interesting to formally think about if you were holding on to a iconic moment from a fairy tale, to try and give structure to who the characters are, and maybe talk about things that are important to you now. So that's the prompt.
Well, thank you. This is great. This has been wonderful. And thank you for giving us a little structure to reimagine.
Thanks for showing up, everybody. It's nice to see your faces here. Good luck. Have fun writing. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Okay, friends. So Maria has given us our task. We're going to take, I think, 15 minutes to write. So think through some cultural stories, maybe make a list for yourself before you dive in. And then whatever cultural story you choose, pick one thing that happens or is present in that story that you want to use within the scene you write, or the outline you make for a play you want to write, or a monologue moment, whatever, how you want to apply that tangible, like we can all see that moment in that cultural story we share into a contemporary reimagining. Let's just take some time to think through those cultural stories, pick one like moment from that cultural story, and create some alchemy with today. So happy writing. I'll be messaging you shortly. thank you for joining us. You'll receive a follow-up email. The takeaway for today will be to continue, writing this piece, and maybe let's put on our director's hat since we had Maria with us today. Think about, Wizard of Oz, the salient plot point is melting the witch. How, as a director, would you melt that witch? Or looking at your own piece, like, you're doing the wolf in grandma's clothing. How would you make that happen, or how does that manifest itself in your piece? So put the director hat on with this cultural story, with your own piece, and think of a bunch of different ways as to how you might actualize it for when we are in a theater together again. Again, thank you for joining us. These are always bright spots in my week, and today is no different. I hope you all find some sun and some air today. So enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Bye, all.